You're listening to Laugh Out Loud, Science for the Classroom and Beyond. I'm your co-host, Dale Basler.
And I'm Brian Bartel.
And like many of our episodes, they often start off with something that Brian and I has been, just caught our eye, and we're reading through or flipping through, and the phrase Chromebook... Clicking through, that's a good one. The phrase Chromebook churn popped out on my news feed one day, and boy, was I drawn to it. And it is the subject of, it is specifically on Chromebooks used in the classroom and how many we are going through and in that respect, but I think it could also be thought of as all of the technology that we're going through. So joining us today is Lucas Gutterman, the author of that article that caught our eye. Welcome to the show, Lucas.
Yeah, happy to be here. First of all, can you tell us a little bit about what you do?
Sure. Yeah, I am a researcher and the director of the Design to Last campaign with US PIRG, the Public Interest Research Group. We're a national nonprofit that stands up to powerful special interests for the public interest on issues of the environment, public health, and democracy.
What's the history of PIRG? Like, how long has it been around, or where did it come from?
Yeah, well, we actually got started in 1971 by college students.
Oh, really?
Which is how I got involved in this work as well. I was an intern with my PIRG chapter in Massachusetts in school.
Oh.
And got started registering folks to vote, and then ended up working with students across the country, and then transitioned to this role on the
So you've been with PIRG all this while then?
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah, since I was 18 and registered my first voter.
We always like to ask our guests, because it's sometimes used in classrooms and things like that, and we like to give students ideas on how people get to their careers. Sometimes it's a linear path, sometimes it's a very meandering trail. Can you tell us a little bit about that? How did you start, maybe let's say high school, even middle school or something like that, to get interested into work you do now?
Was it like an iPod that you couldn't change the battery in? Yeah. Something like that?
Yeah, what was the tech you had in your classroom?
Yeah. Well, actually, it has been something that I've been thinking about a lot, that my first laptop was one of those orange iBooks.
Yeah.
And I mean the translucent ones?
Yeah.
The translucent ones. My boss calls it the legally blonde laptop, which is fair. But I had that, and I, as a student, I had dysgraphia, so I really sort of struggled to write essays and take tests in class, and I would bring my laptop to school. I think even maybe late, probably not elementary school, but starting in middle school.
Were you the only one? Yeah. Were you unique doing that?
Oh yeah, it was a very at that
for the
time
dysgraphia
sort of out there thing to do. I think at one year, I even experimented with bringing one of those little Wacom tablets to do my math class notes. That was not really a good idea. I stopped doing it after a year, but anyway, so it's been in the classroom for a long time for me, and those laptops were so much more repairable, right? You could replace the battery with a quarter, opening up the bottom, or just peel back the keyboard and put more RAM.
Did you have schools provide you anything?
At that point, no.
I didn't think so, yeah.
Yeah, there was no tech provided by the school. We had devices that were owned by the school. So, I do remember having a laptop cart for science class. I had a great science teacher who we did all this research on the hurricane season in maybe 6th or 7th grade or something like that. And we used this Metaplots software, something like that, to plot all of the characteristics. So that was fun.
So that's kind of maybe your elementary, high school. Did you have go from there to the work that you do now?
Yeah. Well, it was kind of a meandering path, and it now feels like it's really all come together, which is really exciting. I
meandering
really
destiny.
Cared about, a little bit. I always really cared about the environment. I was part of my high school environmental club, and we worked to do composting and make the school more energy efficient. But I also had this love of technology, and I was taking computer science classes and programming classes in high school, actually, which was really, I think we were the first year that was offered. And so I went to college studying computer science, and that's what I got my degree in. I did that for 4 years, but the whole time kind of thinking, well, I don't really know if I want to be a code monkey who's programming for 8 hours a day. Not that, there's anything wrong with that, but it wasn't the thing that I was actually most excited about in college, which was actually being an intern with my PIRG chapter, working on environmental campaigns and, working to pass policy to increase recycling and things like that. So,
sure.
So I ultimately went that route, and I worked with college students in New Jersey and then Oregon and Washington and California, running the same sorts of campaigns that I had as a college student and helping them get those skills.
Okay.
And this campaign that we had been running at the national level, Right to Repair, an opportunity to get involved with that came up. And it feels like it's sort of the perfect wedding of those two interests that I had, the politics and the environment, and actually using my, kind of techie background and interest in software and technology together. So that's been really exciting to actually kind of find a niche that fits those two things together.
Do you still do any coding or programming?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think sometimes it's more of a less efficient solution than actually just doing it, manually. But I still kind of have that urge that if something is really repetitive and not that interesting, I'm like, just write a batch script to do this. So I'm going to do it manually.
In coding, it can be considered, the energy cost can be in the lines of code, right? If it was written inefficiently, it might, as a whole, take up more energy. Is there merit to that idea?
Yeah, could be. It's certainly true that the amount of energy that it takes to run some piece of software can vary a lot depending on how it's written.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
We see that with Chrome updates all the time, right? And not to kind of segue into our stuff, but actually I do want to touch on a little bit of what you said. Dale and I are both science teachers, and so we do have a kind of a bend towards environmentalism, and we definitely want to support that. But we also work in technology, so our e-waste footprint is probably larger than most people's, and sometimes that's kind of hard to square with myself. Like, yes, this is part of my job, and this is part of what we do here too. But I like to think about like the fact that maybe what I do, I don't like to. I'm very similar to you. I don't like to replace things that don't need to be replaced. I'd love to be able to repair them if I can. We have a over 25-year-old furnace in our house that I'm trying to keep, working as long as I can, because I just don't like having to replace things I don't need to replace.
Yeah.
But at the same time, technology, that's a lot harder to do with physical devices and even kind of like, I can think of some of my older laptops that like generate heat, and that they're working faster and harder than a newer laptop. And how do you square all that away? Like, how do you sit with that?
How do you sleep at night?
Yeah, how do I sleep at night?
On a cold night, I sleep with my laptop. I know.
When we look at environmental impacts, one of the things that I found so empowering at doing this work in college was the scale that comes from being able to make policy level changes. We all are maybe driving to work or the grocery store, and we might be buying meat or produce that's been shipped around the world, and this laptop that I'm on has certainly been shipped all around the world, and energy was extracted to make it run, to produce it. It's not all on our shoulders as individuals, right? If we can actually make decisions as a country, or if companies can actually make decisions about how they design products, that's going to have the biggest impact. And so that's, I think, the thing that we can really focus on in terms of trying to lessen our impact overall.
So when we think about schools, that's scaling up to a larger system where if you're providing technology for every student, then that should be maybe something in our head, which kind of gets to your report, right?
Yeah, I was going to say, let's go to the phrase Chromebook churn. I think that's a nice gateway into that. What is Chromebook churn?
Right. Well, so, just a little bit of context is that this idea really came up because we have been working on right to repair for the past 4 or 5 years, and that's the right to fix our stuff, basically having the tools, the information that we need to be able to repair our phones and laptops and tablets and even appliances. And Chromebooks in particular kept being brought up by the repair technicians and some of the IT directors that we were working with on right to repair. And they said, hey, this is really a problem. You have to look into this. So we did. And what I found in the report is that Chromebooks are just not designed to last. So that's the churn. So there's a couple of different reasons why these laptops are just way shorter lived than they ought to be or could be. And we make several recommendations in the report of changes Google could make that would just make these laptops last longer and reduce that churn. Just to kind of highlight, I think the churn that you see at the local level, and that's so shocking, right? Is just these piles of laptops that are decommissioned or are being refreshed or have expired because they passed their expiration date, which are just stacked in shelves, right?
Yes.
In the back of a school. And that just seems so kind of outrageous on its face to me. I remember that, that MacBook that iBook that I was just talking about, that orange laptop, I had to treat that thing like a baby. Right? Like,
oh yeah. I mean, they
so
come in with
carefully.
such fanfare,
Yeah.
and they go out with such whimpers.
Right.
I remember.
Right. So it just seems, I think, outrageous on its face. And then when you learn more about the impact of that waste, you kind of see how big the problem actually is.
With my physics classes, I had a lot of times you need to do a ramp, ball down ramp, cart down ramp, all kinds of things, and or up ramp for friction and stuff. And I would always have the board, and I would prop it up with some old physics textbooks because I had these big stacks of physics textbooks, and people are like, why do you still have these? And I'm like, oh, those are 4 ramps, 4 books high or 5 books high, and it looked great too because it rounded off the whole demonstration. And I remember jokingly saying, or one of my students said, eventually there's gonna be a stack of iPads. You're gonna need tons of iPads to get it up to the height you had, or it's gonna be some laptops stacked up like that. And no, that's a little bit true. We could need a lot more iPads to get the book height, but still, it's a little sad. All of our textbooks did go digital at those levels and move that way. And yeah, now we do have cupboards and shelves and stacks full of technology that are done.
But I do think it's notable that those textbooks are still around.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So you could still open the textbook and, perhaps there's been updates and so on, but my guess is that, some of the fundamental ideas of physics have not really changed that much in the last couple of decades since you bought them.
Yeah.
And so they'd still be usable.
Yes. Maybe some of the practices, how it's done, I could see that. Student representation, I think, would be an issue.
Well,
if you're talking weather, if you have an old one, if you know of an old book that discusses weather, like anything pre-Hurricane Katrina, for instance, which we do have in our district.
Bias and representation in general, I think, would be sometimes if you had a textbook that's too old. But I'm definitely not worried about their bulging battery,
right.
or what resource, what metals that are basically stuck there that I could use again. Paper, but still, it pales in comparison, I think.
I think about the TI-84 calculator I got in high school too, which is still completely functional, right? It's been
I still have, which one did you say, 84?
That's the one that I had that still works.
This is my 85 from college. The 85 was the oddball of the group. Yeah. It had a different programming and all that kind of stuff, but I still have my 85 and it's being a little grouchy. But I had the TI-84 is a solid calculator for that, but we had a bunch of 81s and 82s. Now, some of them don't work, but to see a box of them is kind of staggering. It's just
I really like that old model. It's what I grew up on, first of all, but I like having the list. I don't like just having one line, for instance. But if you go to the newer TI graphing calculators, they're rechargeable, which that adds something to it. But it's a different feel to it. There's something that I can do a few more things to it. I can hook up sensors. I can do that. But just balancing my checkbook. Again, I'm sure there's some kids laughing at me right now, but
I can see why the high school has gotten rid of them. There were a bunch that just don't work anymore. They stopped.
Oh.
And it's not just batteries. They just garble.
memory doesn't hold on to lots of little stuff.
So I think honestly, it takes like people like us maybe are probably going through them for nostalgia reasons, but that comes back to a counter of what you were saying. Like, that's not policy. That's just hobbyists fooling around. And at scale, I don't know how much what that can do.
I will say about the TI-84 is that, us going through the bin for nostalgia purposes is one thing, but the decisions that were made to design it so that it lasts that long is a policy decision, right? And
Absolutely.
the fact that those last as long as they do versus these laptops that maybe can only last 2 or 3 years, I think speaks to just the choices that were made on how to actually make these devices.
So your report talks about things like having more replaceable screens, having more standardized parts. There were different models that had like nominal differences between the two, and there's kind of being essentially designed and built for repair as opposed to just kind of cranked out, I guess. That is one of the solutions. Are there other solutions? Can you give us some of the solutions that Google could make in this situation?
Yeah, we make 5 recommendations in the report, but there's really 2 main ones. The first one is that Google should extend the expiration dates of these devices so that they last longer, right? So Chromebooks have a date after which they can't receive software updates. And for schools, that often means once that date has passed, the laptops just don't actually do what they need them to do. So some schools can't access state testing websites, you can't access Google Classroom, or you can't even sort of use it as your own personal device because it might not be able to access Netflix. So one thing is we just said, hey, this date should be longer. And our laptops, we shouldn't be having laptops that are functional from a hardware standpoint that just stop working just because this arbitrary date has passed.
We'll be right back.
I think the testing thing is a big thing. Speaking of like policy, I mean, we have state testing that has parameters that says you must have this version of Chrome. You have to have, it's usually just this version of Chrome, Chrome OS, which basically then dictates if you're past that life and you can't update to that, you can't run it. So if we can make that testing software last a little longer too, I think that has promise.
Yeah. It might be the case that there's some work to do with state testing software to make them more backwards compatible, but I do also think that it's not unreasonable to require or, have policies that say that the computers that our students are using ought to be as secure as they possibly can, and that requires being updated. So once this update has, the timeline is passed and they can't receive updates, not only do you lose access, but you just are sort of accumulating more potential vulnerabilities that you now are never going to actually receive a software update.
Or if they have like updates where it's like you don't have to go to 116, 117, 118, you can go to like this, and then these add-ons, maybe you have a more advanced device that takes you, like this is the base level bare minimum, and then these additional updates can take you farther for the new features for a new device. I'm not sure how, but there's work to be done there.
No, it's a good point. I think that there's a big difference between feature updates and security updates.
Yes.
Right? And so what we are saying, or what we're sort of recommending in the report, is that security updates ought to last really as long as possible, as long as the device is functional. And maybe that's 10 years or 8 years.
Yes.
Apple just released a security update for an 8-year-old iPhone. Like that. So, there's a lot of issues that Apple has with right to repair, certainly, but that's a good thing that we're sort of looking at.
Sure. What was the other?
So the other big bucket is the hardware. So as you're talking about, right? we found some, pretty funny examples where from one model to the next, you would see the plastic bezel that's around the screen get one minor little change. Maybe the camera cutout changes from a circle to a square. Maybe there's some notches on the bottom. And those changes, that aren't providing any innovation or features for students or the users, those changes would make those parts incompatible from one model to the next. So we also recommend that Google work with the manufacturers like Acer and HP and Dell, the folks that are actually making the hardware for the Chromebooks, and set standards for modularity and durability and repairability so that we can use these parts across models, screens and batteries and keyboards and sort of most commonly replaced and broken parts, and don't have to just throw out all the spares when we upgrade our models.
And there's even like an ancillary piece to that too. Like if you have Chromebooks that have like a fit cover over them, and we've experienced this in our district too, where a slightly updated model, the old cases won't fit, and that's essentially just a plastic shell around the outside of it. Yes, that plastic shell helps to prevent damage, but then it basically offsets it completely if you have to replace it after a year.
Not like it made a difference in the thickness. It's not like, oh, well, this one's thinner, so naturally it gets a different case. No, it's just nominally different.
Yeah, I mean, it would be like if you had accessories for your car, like a tow hitch, and when you changed from one car to another car, you'd have to throw out your tow hitch and buy a totally new one.
Yeah,
that's not actually the way it works for other products, but for technology, we sort of accept that.
Oh, you've got a Honda. You gotta get this model, or
well, you have a new Honda. You gotta switch.
Oh, that's different.
Right,
that's a good comparison.
So, but that's sort of, we accept that status quo in technology for some reason.
And appliances.
Is
nasty.
That purposeful, or is that just accidental, or is it all the above?
Yeah, I don't know what Google's intentions are, but I do know the effect, right? Which is just that when we don't have that modularity across models for spare parts, it just pushes schools and consumers to buy more. So the effect of all of these software obsolescence issues and hardware incompatibilities and frequent updates is that we're just sort of caught on this disposability treadmill where we keep having to buy more stuff, whether it's, replacing our laptop or replacing our phone every 2 years, tablet, or, you mentioned appliances, washer dryers and dishwashers. That's just not sustainable. It's really bad for the climate. And also these parts all use rare earth metals, which are not infinite. I mean, at some point we're just going to run out.
Yeah, let's go into that deeper, because that's my next question is like, why does it matter? So, starting with the environment, like what damage is this doing? And I know it seems like an obvious question, but people lining up to get their new iPhone, that feels better, I guess. So how do we convey the issue on that side of things?
Yeah, I guess
the damage, what has the damage done?
For sure. And this kind of goes back to what Brian was talking about, right? With just, well, what about our individual choices and how does that have to do with the technology we use? But I think what sort of happened, this is maybe really obvious to you and the listeners you have on this podcast, but maybe is not obvious to sort of the average citizen, especially if they don't have a younger kid who's in K through 12, is the amount of information technology that now is in K-12 is enormous, right? So obviously it was sort of pushed forward by COVID with the switch to remote learning. But even before that, we found an Education Week study or survey rather that said that 90% of middle and high schools at this point in 2019, I believe when the survey was, already had one-to-one programs in place. And so that's only gone up, right?
And if you're in a middle school, high school, if you're starting middle school and going through high school, you're effectively using 2 different devices throughout your career. If, you might use more, but at least 2.
If it's on that like 4 or 5 year cycle, right?
Right. So we have, 48 million K through 12 students in public schools across the country, and we have all these one-to-one programs that now are in full force. The stakes of getting this right and actually having sustainable ed tech are quite high just because of the scale of the industry that, what it's become. So one thing that we found in the report is that doubling the lifespan of Chromebooks from 4 to 8 years could save schools $1.8 billion, assuming no additional maintenance costs. And in terms of the environment, we found that it could cut carbon emissions equivalent to taking 900,000 cars off the road for a year.
And I just saw the 60 Minutes had a story about like carbon capture and these carbon capture programs, and I was like, wow, this is great. And then they're like, that's the equivalent of 70,000 cars or something. It was like a really small. I felt like the number was not big enough, and I was like, how about we just drive a few less of those cars or something, so something like that. So 900,000 is a number that sits better with me.
I also worry about the accumulated effects downstream. So I think about a student who, again, maybe we have one-to-one in our district, so starting in kindergarten or before, going through 12th grade, you're looking at 3 devices on a 4 to 5 year cycle. And the ethos that kind of like instills in that child, always getting something new. I don't have to take care of it because we can repair it. And you keep perpetuating that down, into the child's future. And what does that mean for what they've learned about disposability in their world?
Yeah, I do think there's a pedagogical element to this for sure, which, I can't really speak directly to, but I do think that the ethos that I got with that laptop that I had and how much, how important it was constantly expressed to me to take care of it and to make it last long. We definitely don't want to be unintentionally educating our kids into thinking that things are disposable, because that mindset is just literally not sustainable. We will not be able to keep this rate of consumption of technology.
Well, you're talking to 2 teachers early in our career who pilfered and begged and pulled in old desktops from student families even, and our old ones to make a computer lab in our science classrooms, and that's how we did it. And now it is a lot easier that they're all supplied by the district, but
that's because we were doing it before there was a budget for it. Now,
correct.
Now, many districts have budgets for this, so the staff, the students, the district is going to say, well, we have money for this. We passed a referendum perhaps that is earmarked for this. So some schools are going to definitely be like, we need to save costs, or we got to stretch our Chromebooks. So they look at it from a financial standpoint. But I think there's plenty of school districts, plenty of students that aren't going to look at it at a financial cost, because some kids, that's not even, it's too abstract for them. It's not real to them. They're not paying for it. But the schools too, it's like, well, that $1 million is, look, I don't think money's the
motivator.
Big enough. Yeah, not enough of a motivator. But some of these other ideas about disposability and those kinds of things, like that is a good point of kind of, having those kids think about their own future when we have those conversations. We could add that in instead of so many like, do you know how much this costs? And if you break it and all these, you go through those rules, those onboarding with the device. This could be part of it too, is like what are the virtues of having things last long and getting the best out of them?
Yeah, if students took away from their onboarding that a huge amount of energy was required to make the device that they're using, and that that deserves some sort of stewardship and respect to the longevity of it, that would be great, right?
Yeah.
Because I do think one of the key takeaways of the report is that it's not so much about using the devices and that energy consumption. It's much more about the initial costs it takes to manufacture the device. So that's by far where the most energy and materials.
Sure.
Every time a student breaks a Chromebook, we put him on one of those bikes that generate the energy.
They have to pedal.
You got to pay through this through your legs.
Pedal until you got it. I remember. Do you guys remember the movie Interstellar?
Yes.
there's this quote in Interstellar where the dad of Matthew McConaughey, it was John Lithgow, they're sitting on the porch and basically the Earth is, I mean, it's dystopian. The Earth is, they want to leave the Earth because it's not, they ruined it. And he has this quote, and I have it up. When I was a kid, I think he's leaking back to our time.
When I was a kid, it felt like they made something new every day. Some gadget or idea, like every day was Christmas. But 6 billion people, just try to imagine that. And every last one of them trying to have it all.
I remember hearing that the first time, and when I hear it, it's just shattering to think about.
6 billion. We're looking at 8 billion, Dale.
Yeah, well, that's when the movie came out, and I want to pair that clip up with like a string of, get the new tablet, get the new iPhone, get the new thing, and just kind of like comparing those. So there is a little bit of just consumption discussion here that we can have with students. What about the end of the life of the device? It's over. We can go no farther. What happens to, let's say, a Chromebook after that? What elements are in there that do we get them back, and or are we losing them? Are we throwing them out? Do you have any sense of what that looks like?
Yeah, I will say that schools, I think, are really sort of ahead of the general market in terms of having really good electronic waste recycling policies. Sometimes there's state laws, sometimes it's just the district, sort of made a decision. But the reality is that we can't recycle our way out of the problem of manufacturing and consumption, right? I mean, I can kind of give you some stats, but even if you just think about it for a second, we don't really have the technology to take a laptop and magically melt it down into its component parts, right? And we might never, right? We can disassemble and we can take away this piece of plastic and we can take away this piece of gold that's on the circuit board. But at a certain point, it is so uneconomical to do that it's not going to happen.
I mean, isn't this an issue forever then? Isn't it just a matter of time that we're putting it off?
Well, except time is money, right? So if it takes too long, then no one's gonna pay to do that.
No, I mean, like, how long it's going to take to run out of whatever makes our laptop, or we just keep looking for a new resource to fill that void.
Yeah, actually, I don't know the answer to that question.
Like, are there any components of a laptop that were like, oh, there's scarcity involved, that have caused people to shift from one thing? In electronics, like we can't source this as much anymore that it's shifted to this. I don't know the answer to that, but I could foresee a future where something like that happens. Oh, well, these all have to have this now because we ran out of that.
I mean, the scarcity we've been hitting up against is just manufacturing the chips, right?
Yeah.
So there's been that whole issue with just having the supply chain to actually manufacture the chips in the first place, and that resource is so valuable that our government is making decisions from that.
Yeah,
Lucas, I can hear some buts in my own head and from other like tech directors and friends that I know of, and I even think like, okay, back in the day we had a BYOB program, bring your own, or BYOD, bring your own device, and that was the BYOB came later because that was such a frustrating time because kids would come in with their own stuff and it was this hodgepodge, and obviously the efficiency that's lost when you have to troubleshoot 18 different platforms and whatnot, that was a lot of work, and so the standardization saved a lot more time in that sense. And then again, security would be another issue that I would hear. All the other things, even charging units, for instance, like having a standard cart that everyone's Chromebook fits into. There's lots of efficiency in time that's gained from having the same device and having a functional device. But of course, like we're talking about, like, so those are the yabbats that I'm thinking about. Like, how do you respond to those I guess rebuttals?
Well, I'm not telling schools that there's anything that they ought to be doing differently than what they already are. For a lot of IT departments, Chromebooks will be the correct solution to meet their needs. Instead, what I'm saying is Google could make certain changes that would significantly decrease the environmental costs and even the financial costs to schools of using Chromebooks. And given how popular Chromebooks are and how much work that they've done to sort of win over the K through 12 market, I think they have a responsibility to make those changes.
What influences Google, though? I mean, they don't take our calls.
I mean, I do think it's you
articles
guys
like
more
this,
than me, right? I mean, I'm just a guy on the internet, but hearing from IT directors and hearing from
teachers and
elected,
schools and school boards, things like that.
Teachers and school boards and elected officials. And, this is a decision that, of course, can be made on a sort of individual school by individual school method. But ultimately, to me, it makes sense that school boards might pass policies saying, for example, we'll only buy ed tech that lasts at least 8 years.
Right.
Sure.
And that's, I think, when we see policy made at large levels, I mean, when you see states adopt certain things or very, very large school districts, these companies do listen because it's a huge share of their market sometimes. And, we kind of joke about like the Texas, like a textbook kind of issues, and, that they adapt because that's a business model for them.
We talked a lot about Google, but do you have any insights about other devices? Like if let's say the listener out there that doesn't have Chromebooks in their classroom, do we know anything about those, other things? Are they all similar, or
in terms of just
repairability, getting them to last longer? Is there a device or a set of devices out there that's kind of doing it right, or
Yeah. Well, I mean, this does bring up a good point, right? Which is that it's certainly not the case that it's just Google who's responsible for all of our problems of e-waste, right?
Sure.
So Google is not, sort of solely responsible here. It's just that because they're so popular in K-12, I think, they ought to make these changes. I will say, though, that one of the sort of models to follow is there's this company called Framework. They have a laptop and there's Fairphone for smartphones, but Framework has a laptop. I believe they've just released a Chromebook as well. I think it'll be up for schools to decide. My guess is that the price point doesn't really make sense for most schools, but as a model of where to go, they are really demonstrating that you can build hardware that is modular and upgradable and designed to last. And I'm sure the really innovative genius engineers at Google can kind of look at that and see how they can apply that.
Sure.
Before we let you leave, Lucas, how can teachers get more involved? How can educational leaders get more involved? How can students, speak up, I guess, and if this is a concern for them?
Yeah, I will say that I think students are a big sort of untapped resource in this because they really care, right? I mean, I've really got the chance to work with this student in Massachusetts who is repairing Chromebooks at her school. She's part of one of these internship programs with her IT department. And, she was kind of the one that told me that, hey, I just saw these crates of laptops that once were working and now weren't working. And we were told, oh, you can't fix those. Just put those in the corner on the floor.
Challenge accepted. She's like, yeah, let's see.
Yeah, she was like, that's absurd. But students, teachers, even parents, and everyone can sort of be involved by just asking Google to make these changes. So we have a petition on PIRG.org that folks can search for, telling Google to extend the life of Chromebooks. In particular, there's 13 models that are expiring in the next 3 months. And we're calling on Google to, just like they have in the past with COVID, extend the expiration date for those particular 13 models.
Yeah, they did that sometimes even before COVID. They stretched them out. So
yeah,
one of my biggest pet peeves is I have people ask me around the holidays or even during like Amazon days down in the summer, like, oh, there's this really good deal on a Chromebook. Should I get it? And obviously that's a bigger question than I can answer in the hallway passing. But I said one of the things to watch is the end of life. They're like, what do you mean? And I'm like, well, they kind of have an expiration date that you want to watch for, and just be kind of aware of what that means. And I've even had a couple of people like, no big deal, but then they kind of realized that was a big mistake, and then they made the purchase, and then again, for very little bang, they spent the money and didn't get a lot out of it.
Yeah, it's all fine and good until you try and go on Google Docs or Netflix. And they say, what am I doing with this?
Do you enjoy 360 resolution?
Yeah, right.
Well, thank you so much for your time. It's given us a lot to think about, and I think this is timely as schools are thinking about what next year might hold and preparing for that transition.
Yeah, thanks so much. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to our show. If you'd like to know more about this episode or any of our previous episodes, visit laboutloud.com. Lab Out Loud is produced by me, Dale Basler, and my co-host, Brian Bartell. If you have questions, comments, or suggestions for Lab Out Loud, visit laboutloud.com/contacts. Thanks again.